see a superhero book coming out from the Archie Company, you'll know that's the one. And remember, it's the world's first reality comic book. And if you haven't seen enough of me yet, you're going to see even more of me in that book. I can't wait to see it. Thank you.
All right, we're going to go way back in the time machine now. Marvel, the original company started by Martin Goodman, also known as Timely in the 40s, dated back to the pulps in the 1930s. But the cultural phenomenon that Marvel became, and all the millions of dollars and millions of fans that have been entertained by them since, is primarily the result of the creative work you did in the 60s with artist collaborators including Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, John Buscema, John Romita, Gene Colan, Jim Steranko, and others.
You okay? John Buscema?
I got that one. And there's many more. I want to talk about those days, and I think probably a good place to start is pretty much the beginning was Fantastic Four. And I've heard a story before, may have been in your autobiography, about that you had some ideas and different things you wanted to do. You weren't sure if you wanted to stay in comics. Comics were not doing well in the 50s, and that a new book was coming up, and Joni, your wife, had said to you, "Why don't you try putting some of those ideas in the comics?" Does that ring a bell? Do you have a story?
Oh, it rings a bell. I've written about this so often. I don't know if you've all heard it, but anyway, for the 2 or 3 people who haven't heard it. I was really bored doing the same old comics that I had done for years, the kind my publisher wanted me to do. So I wanted to quit. And then my publisher, whose name was Martin said to me, "I hear that the competition, DC Comics, although they were called National Comics at the time," he said, "I hear that National Comics put out a book called The Justice League, and it's selling very well. Why don't you make a series of superheroes and put them in one book?" So I figured, the hell with it, I'm going to quit. But my wife said to me, she said, "Look, Stan, why don't you do it, but do it the way you'd like to write it, not the way Martin is always telling you." See, Martin always said, don't worry about characterization, don't put in a lot of dialogue, don't use any big words, the readers won't understand them, just get a lot of action. All I want is a lot of fight scenes in my stories. So Joni said, do the kind of story you'd like to do, try to get more personality into it. The worst that can happen, he'll fire you if he doesn't like it, and you want to quit anyway, so get it out of your system. So that's why I did the Fantastic Four, and I didn't give them costumes, because I felt, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but if I had a superpower, which is not to say that I don't, but if I had a superpower, this may surprise you, but I'm a little bit of a show-off. I wouldn't want to hide my identity. I would want everybody to know, look at me, I'm better than you, I've got a superpower. I'd be bragging about it. So I always thought, why do these guys all wear masks? I want to let everybody know. And so the one thing I did, I didn't give them costumes and masks. And I've always hated teenage sidekicks. I always felt if I were a superhero, the last thing I would do is hang around with some teenager. At the very least, people would talk. So I had a teenager in the book, but he wasn't a sidekick. He was a regular guy with the Human Torch, with regular power. And I made him the brother of Sue Storm, the Invisible Girl. I made them a little family. And I made the hero, Reed Richards, a little bit like me. He talks too much. He bores people. He uses big words. Nobody understands him. I tried to make him kind of realistic. And then I had the most fun with the Thing. I wanted to get a likable, funny monster, if you can picture that. That's the way the Thing turned out. Excuse me. So that was the way I pictured the Fantastic Four. And I gave them a lot of dialogue, which my boss hated. So I figured I'm going to be fired, and that's the end of it. But the book sold well, And he said, hey Stan, do some more. So we did the X-Men, and we did the Hulk, and we did Spider-Man, and the rest is history. Okay?
I thought that the Thing reminded me a little bit of Jack Kirby.
The Thing reminded you of Jack. It's a good thing Jack isn't here.
No, people ask Jack, which characters that you did, do you relate to the most, and he cited the Thing numerous times.
I think we both related to the Thing the most. We loved that character. And the way Jack designed him, nobody could have done it that well, I think.
What could you cite? Okay, so coming into the 60s with Fantastic Four, and then Spider-Man takes off too, and Iron Man and the rest. I'm very interested about that period because there was so much going on, everything was changing. There was such a cultural shift during the 60s in fashion, art, music, and in comic books. And what can you cite any times that you thought, were you just thinking we're onto something as far as business here, sales are good, or did you think you were, really carving out new ground in a way? I think of things like you used to speak on college campuses, which no comics, head of a comics company had been speaking on college campuses and things like that.
Well, what happened was, we had never gotten fan mail before the Fantastic Four. Or maybe we'd get a letter. The books were a dime at that time. Maybe we'd get a letter from some kid who'd say, I want my dime back because a staple came out of the binding and my pages were out. I'd hang that letter on the wall. I'd say, look, we got a fan letter. But after the Fantastic Four, we really started getting fan mail. And then, after the X-Men and the other books, the fan mail started growing, and it was very funny. Originally, the fan mail, most of it was in crayon, written in crayon. Later on, some of the letters graduated to pencil. Later, some letters came in written in pen. And then later on, they were typed. And then the return addresses were suddenly schools and high schools and colleges. And somewhere around 63 or so, 64, I started getting invitations to lecture at colleges, and I couldn't believe it. Naturally, I went because I love to lecture. I love to talk to audiences because they can't answer back. I mean, you are what's known as a captive audience. I really feel sorry for you. I have the power. I can talk. All you can do is listen. But, well, that's what you came for. At any rate, I'll tell you a funny thing about these lectures, too. The first time I was invited to lecture was, I remember, Bard College at upstate New York. And I thought, boy, I'm going to lecture at a college. And I put on my best suit and my nicest tie, and I shined my shoes. And I went there, and they were all a bunch of hippies. Nobody even knew what a necktie was. So I was a little bit overdressed. Well, the next invitation I got, believe it or not, was from Princeton. But I wasn't going to be tricked again. I came in a pair of jeans and a dirty sweatshirt, and I get invited to dinner at the dean's house, where the food is served by a butler with white gloves, and I'm sitting there in my jeans. The point is, you can't win. If you're ever invited to lecture at a college, bring a lot of different outfits. But at any rate, that's when I knew we were on to something. If that answers your question, because I've totally forgotten what the question was.